So public and private organizations can be distinguished in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways that we don't really distinguish between public and private organizations is the profit motive. That's to say that public and private activities can't be distinguished by the profit motive alone. Now, there are private, non-governmental organizations that can be nonprofits and advance a social agenda. And there can be government agencies that have to run based on the profit motive. Let me give you some examples. A public organization that has to be operated on a for-profit basis, or at least to cover their costs, would be like the FDIC, or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. It is a government agency that insures banks, so that if the banks fail, that individuals get to have their money up to a certain limit. Now, banks pay the FDIC money to cover their insurance costs. It's an insurance premium. Okay, well, they have to pay for their own bills. And if they generate excess because they're an insurance company, they generate excess profits, they can't spend it, they can't give it to shareholders. Who's a shareholder for government? Well, citizens. But it doesn't get reimbursed that way. And technically, the citizens aren't paying for it because the banks are paying for it. So they can cover all their own costs. They can cover their monitoring costs. They can cover hiring. They can cover, they can adjust their fees and all these other structures. But they essentially run as a government agency on a for-profit model. We also have organizations that are public that don't really care about profits. Like, we think about those all the time, like police officers. Police officers can't generate a profit. They can't get more tickets and generate revenue for their organization. That's bad. But we also have private entities that generate profits. We know all of those, like Target, Walmart, Costco, et cetera, et cetera. They have shareholders. Those people own those companies. Now, what about a corporation that doesn't turn a profit, that's privately held? It's owned by a family, owned by an individual, owned by shareholders, but can't turn a profit. What would that look like? Well, there's socially responsible nonprofits that sell things. The Boy Scouts of America, for example, the Girl Scouts. There are nonprofits like the United Way. They're essentially private organizations that rely on donations or selling things, but they can't turn a profit. Doesn't mean they don't need the money, but they can't turn the excess money over to their shareholders. So profit motive is not a good way to distinguish between whether it's public or if it's private. Public means it's held by the government, that the citizens own it. Private means it's held by either a family or an individual or a set of shareholders or some non-government entity. But just to say that public doesn't operate a profit and private does operate a profit really oversimplifies how governments and private organizations work. Now, probably a bigger thing that we think about a lot is that government seeks to do the law. Yes, we call that policy execution. That's to say they take the law, they do the law, they implement the law. Okay, good. Public and private organizations do that. What? How does that happen? Well, think about it this way. If we have a prison, the prison that is like a state prison, the state prison is a public organization. It hires employees. It does the law of corrections, but we have to feed prisoners as part of the correctional process. We can't just house people and police them. We have to feed them. We've got to provide healthcare to them. How does that work? Well, we have to hire private organizations to help do the law. Well, what does that mean? Well, we hire private healthcare providers. We hire private entities to feed prisoners. In fact, we hire private entities to feed the military. National defense, could KFC be part of national defense? Well, kind of. I mean, we have to feed people, and we allow KFC rights to come sell food on military bases. They might provide food for us like Marriott Sodexo or something else. So we could also hire companies to do the work of the government as well. For example, OCTA, Orange County Transit Authority, they have buses that shuttle people around, and we have on-call services for old people or for disabled people. Well, those are expensive. And we could, if we wanted to, and maybe they're doing it. I've heard reports about this, but you could hire Uber or Lyft or a taxi to take some of these people to different places. Well, in that way, a private organization is contracted to do the work of the law from a government entity. So both of them end up doing the work of the law. Now, private organizations we know about as lobbying. We know that Amazon lobbied the state of California to not pass a sales tax, so that California wouldn't pull a sales tax from Amazon. So we know that private companies are out lobbying. They're trying to change laws. They're trying to move organizations forward. They're trying to advance social purposes. But we don't think about government entities generally doing that. But we do. Think about what we talked about in oversight. Those lawmakers are overseeing public organizations. Those public organizations are reporting back on the things that they know. Public organizations are staffs full of experts. I worked as a mining consultant for some period of time, and the Office of Surface Mining was talking with the miners, and they're getting information about what was going on the mines. Then the Office of Surface Mining, as they're regulating, goes back and reports to Congress and the Department of Interior and the Congress, telling them what's going on inside mines. Safety violations, where we might need to shore up the law, what kind of policy and rule changes we need to make in order to make mining better, but also to keep people safe. So public organizations have a formal role in the policy process. They actually ask their opinions because they're a staff of government experts who do the thing. So both private and public organizations contribute to how laws are made. We've talked about public policy execution. This will be kind of a review. Policy execution is taking the law and making it into actions. Law give power to agencies. Administrators shape those ideas into reality. Here's another one that's kind of odd. In California, we have a medical marijuana. In fact, we now have recreational marijuana. How do we license that? Where do we put it? How do we monitor that? Well, administrators have to figure out what the law means and how it says it, and figure out how to write rules, because we don't really want to have a marijuana dispensary right next to a school. It sounds odd, but that kind of matters to people. We don't really want it next to an industrial park either. We don't want to have it in an unsafe space. Because it's against federal law, they can't take that money that they make at a dispensary and put it into a bank. So that's an all-cash business. Because it's an all-cash business, how do we police those areas? How do we make them safe but allow people to have access so they can comply with the law? All of that, doing the work of the law, that's public administration, right? Totally. One of my other favorite examples is what makes a firearm an assault weapon. In 1994, we passed a federal assault weapons ban, and members of Congress said, we don't want assault weapons. Okay, cool. But the experts inside the Department of Justice in alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, the experts who regulate alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, explosives, the ones who know everything about guns, said, we don't really know what an assault weapon is. And you banned it in the law, but how do we implement that ban? Well, they had to write rules about what made a firearm an assault weapon. And it had these different criteria. And if it had 2, it was okay. If it had 3, it wasn't. A bayonet lug, a grenade launcher, able to accept high-capacity magazines, a pistol grip, a 4-end pistol grip, a high rate of fire, a centerfire cartridge, like all sorts of these different things. Oh, collapsible, foldable stock. And if you had 2 of them, you were fine. If you had 3 of them, it was an assault weapon. They had to write rules about how to implement the law. That's policy execution, because those agencies have to translate the law into something they can do. Now, both public and private organizations execute the law. We do contracts with private organizations. We give grants to private organizations. We have partnerships with private organizations. City of Dana Point, for example, is building a pier. They're going to have a public-private partnership. The city is funding it. They want to retain some responsibility because they have that power over the pier area. And they're going to partner with a private organization to make that pier a place for redevelopment. That's great. But they're executing the law. They're executing the will of the members of city council, the elected officials. So that's public and private get to do execution of the law. Now, policy formation, or how we think about what kind of laws need to be made or how they're changed, we know that happens in the private sector. They lobby, they craft proposals. In fact, a lot of the legislation that we get come from think tanks and private entities and private corporations that legislators look at, they maybe mark up, and then they send them to the floor to get worked on. Lawmakers don't often write their own laws. So how does a public organization exist in policy formation? Well, before policy is made, they get to advocate and advise elected officials. These elected officials look at them and they say, hey, what's going on? What do we know about this thing? What do we know about, let's say, for mine safety inspectors? The mine safety inspectors, they come, they report about what's safe, what's not safe, how air is exchanging inside mines, all these things. Then they maybe change the law. Lawmakers change the law. Well, after it's made, as part of the accountability process, the lawmakers come in and they check to see what those agencies are doing. Those agencies say, hey, check this out. This is what we've done. Lawmakers help, the agencies help lawmakers figure out what that means, where we want to make tweaks of the law, and figure out how the law is being actually done on the ground. Now, there's an odd example that I really, really like. It doesn't even have to be from an agency that's an expert. It can just be from different levels of government. For example, Louisiana was the last state to change its drinking age from 18 to 21. And a lot of kids were leaving the surrounding states and coming into Louisiana and getting drunk and driving home and having massive car crashes and dying. And so these surrounding states said, federal government, please help us, make Louisiana change their law. And they pressured Louisiana, and they said, Louisiana, please, please, change your law. All our kids are dying. And Louisiana's like, hey, I got tons of money. I got people buying alcohol, these 18 to 20-year-olds. They're not my citizens. Like, I'm not worried about them drunk driving. Like, they're going home to you. And we're getting sales tax, we're getting revenue taxes from hotel stays and all these other things. The lawmakers didn't have to change the law based on the other states' laws. And then, so the federal government, under federalism, they don't have power to change a state law. But what they did was the National Highway, the Transportation Department and National Highway grants, they said to Louisiana, we'd really like you to change. And Louisiana's like, no, we're not going to do it. We got lots of taxes coming in. So what they did was they changed the rules. They said, hey, if your drinking age isn't 21, we're not going to give you all the federal highway money that comes in the form of a grant. So this is the Transportation Department at the federal level, giving money to the states to help improve transportation, specifically interstate highways. And Louisiana looked at it and were like, that's a lot of money. We'll change our law. And that was it. So we had a federal agency put a little bit of pressure on a state, and the state changed their law. That seems kind of weird, but we have all sorts of ways in which we can engage in the policy process. In particular, public policy is very technical. Like when we think about environmental rules, like what makes clean water clean, what makes air safe to breathe, all that stuff is really highly technical. So we have a staff of experts inside the bureaucracy who can look at those rules. They can look at what's feasible, what's scientifically safe, and so they can interpret a very vague law into something that's really technical. Now, what happens is that the chief executive, for example, like a president or a governor, they can, because they're the manager of those agencies, they can use those agencies to change the rules, and they can use some pressure inside their agencies as they're managing them to write rules that are more favorable to their political perspective. Now, this is just part of modern policy formation, that the agencies are being used as political tools to get a political outcome. Nevertheless, these agencies are involved in the way that we do the work of policy and the way that we formulate policy. Now, Woodrow Wilson was a scholar at Princeton, and he said, we want public administration to be neutral. We don't want it to be politics. We don't want it to be partisan. What we want to do is really just do the work of the law. And he came up with this idea, and some subsequent scholars call the politics administration dichotomy. Politics over here, administration over here, and never shall the two meet. Well, okay, except that's not the way that really works. Because I've already showed you that politics is involved in inside agencies, and agencies are involved in politics. So as much as we'd like to do this administration as a neutral, nonpartisan endeavor, we see these agencies as both political and influencing politics. So Wilson's a big thinker, and we think about him a lot as advancing this idea. Like I said, this is really obvious that administrative staff share in the policy formation function as well as the execution function. Now, the key part here that I think you should really pay attention to is that why policymakers behave is different than why public administrators behave. Public administrators want to do the work of the law. They want to do the science part. They want to do the best practice part. They want to have best professional standards. Policymakers exist to be political and win favor and get their outcomes achieved. I almost never trust policymakers to be apolitical, but I almost always trust public administrators to be apolitical. We have all sorts of different controls about administrative responsibility. And I think we'll continue on this lecture in just a second.